Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I am your host, Al Richards, and I apologize for my attire. I went to the gym this morning, then had a meeting to get to, and then had to hurry and rush home to get ready for this show. So again, I apologize, but it is what it is. Hey guys, we've got a really amazing topic that we're going to be talking about today, and that is resolving spiritual skepticism in recovery. And I think this is a very, very important topic. And we have an amazing guy today who I had the privilege of meeting a couple of weeks ago. We sat down and we had some coffee together and chatted for about an hour. Our guest today is Andrew Pierce. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Absolutely. So just so you guys know a little bit about Andrew Pierce works individually in private practices as well as being aligned with premier mental health and addiction providers, Origins Therapy in Salt Lake City, Utah, and counseling of, I guess that's Southwest Florida in Naples, Florida.
Correct.
Is that correct? And he has developed and tested a clinical model to accelerate both the quality and depth of change for those recovering from addictions and co-occurring disorders. His book, as you can see in the background, Resolving Spiritual Skepticism in Recovery, unpacks an innovative model intended for those who find the spiritual aspects of 12-step programs problematic. He is authoring a companion workbook for clinicians in his endeavor to more widely and effectively combat substance use disorder and its co-occurring psychological issues, which sadly deny happiness and fulfillment to millions. So, Andrew, thank you, buddy. I really, really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the show today.
I'm happy to be here.
So I know, and I'm sure we'll get into it throughout the show, that you yourself have gone through addiction, and you lived quite a partying life, really, from what I understand from when we sat down and talked. However, one thing that really stuck with me when we were chatting, having coffee, is the day that your mind really opened up, realizing that spirituality is huge to help you in your recovery. Is that correct?
That is absolutely right. As a clinician of many years, one of the challenges I had as a person in recovery was, I would go to meetings, for example, 12-step meetings, and I would just notice that the folks that seem to have some sort of spirituality, regardless of the brand, if you will, they seem to have an easier time of it. So I knew that intuitively there's a clinical benefit to having some spirituality, and I just was not one of those people that had that. So that's when I realized that I need to figure something out and try and integrate that into my practice.
Yeah. And again, if I'm not mistaken, and hopefully I'm not, you really didn't have any type of religion or anything throughout your life. Is that correct?
That is accurate. I mean, I grew up in central Wisconsin, and we'd go to church, the Anglican church, Episcopal church, the classic 3 times a year, Christmas, maybe Thanksgiving and Easter. And but none of it stuck. As I got older, I went through addiction, and I became a philosophy major in college, which was kind of the opposite of anything spiritual, and I just saw no need for it. So it really wasn't part of my belief system. And there was really, for a long time, not having spirituality as part integrated into my belief system was not really problematic,
Yeah.
until it became useful. So it really became a choice rather than just sort of an accident that sometimes people stumble across.
Yeah. Well, and it took me a long time to realize what the difference was between religion and spirituality. Because as a lot of our listeners know, or may not even know, I grew up in an LDS family. A lot of our family members are LDS, very active. I was active up until about the age of 13 and then pulled away from it. And my grandma was really wanting me to get back into it. That was kind of like one of her wishes before she passed away. And I wanted to make my grandma happy, so I got back into it a little bit. And then once she passed, I really kind of just went here and there. However, at times I would get a certain feeling, but the majority of the time I got my feeling for me is heading up in the mountains and going on hikes, especially on the hikes where I'm by myself. I've had some of the most spiritual awakenings that I think I've ever had my whole life, and it just, even my wife made a comment a couple of years ago. She goes, "You finally realize the difference between spirituality and religion." And she's so right. And so I'm more of a spiritual type person, and it's because of what I've experienced, right? And how much it's helped me in my life.
Mhm. Well, for me, I think if I had to take sort of a scientific approach, really. I was always sort of an armchair physicist, and I was watching a lecture by a guy by the name of Joe Dispenza, which was very interesting. He has some interesting ideas, and the nature of his practice was basically the idea of using thought, the idea that thought has a material impact on our health. He had been in some sort of bicycle accident, and he had a spinal injury, and the doctors were kind of scratching their heads, and he decided to use thought, basically his imagination, to get better. And his work was based on the idea of placebo effect. And placebo effect just is the idea that it's whenever they come out with a new medicine, for example, they have to do studies on it where they give a certain group of people the medicine, a certain group of people they give nothing, and then a certain group of people they give a pill that those people believe is the medicine. And what's interesting is the placebo group, which is the group who received the pill that they believe is the medicine, can experience up to 75% of the efficacy or the outcome of the people taking the actual medicine, right? And so clearly there is something going on there in terms of mind over matter. And it was exposure to that lecture where he described that and how he applied it to his own self that it occurred to me that spirituality could be, I guess, from a scientific perspective or a clinical perspective, thought of as a placebo effect, regardless of whether or not it has any basis in reality. And so that was the angle from which I went about starting to write the book, right? When I started out with writing the book, it was my intent, I think, was to at least get people to consider the possibility or create a sufficiently compelling argument in favor of spirituality that it would become sort of a foregone conclusion. They would internalize that belief in that possibility, and then derive the clinical benefits of spirituality. And what are those benefits? I mean, if you think about addiction as being, for instance, a sort of a dysfunctional stress reaction, right? A reaction to stressful emotions. Spirituality resolves a lot of those things. It takes away fuel for the desire to self-medicate when you get this overall sense that things are going to be okay, that we're not victimized by our environment, that we're totally, it's basically a victim mentality that can come along with addiction. Well, if my circumstances weren't a certain way, then I wouldn't fill in the blank with whatever the addictive behavior is. And so having a spiritual perspective removes a lot of the anxiety that comes with living day-to-day life. And so it was from that placebo effect angle that I began writing the book. But what was interesting is I started to look at different spiritual philosophies, particularly Eastern philosophy, and started applying some of the the principles I was writing about. I had to test them out, right? Doing guided meditations by guys like Muji, and these types. It became an experiential. That's the experiential aspect of the process, where I just, all I had to do was sit and listen, and have the experience of becoming separate from our thoughts and from our emotions, and becoming the conscious observer of those things, right? So then the next question was, what is consciousness? What is that state of being? And so it became this sort of progressive linear approach, which ultimately I was experiencing the benefits of spirituality. I started out being, super skeptical, and by the end of the process, I had enough experiences aligned with the ideas of having a spirituality that it became integrated into my personality. And since then, I developed a clinical model to help patients that have issues with anxiety and addiction, and the underlying factors that drive addiction. And I've had a lot of success with it. And so that's a majority of my practice now, is working on that underlying stuff, implementing some of the tools that I was dug up in this 2-year project of bringing this clinical model together.
I love it. We all have a journey, right? And something we're supposed to accomplish here.
Mm-hmm.
And I have really found out, since actually starting doing this show and doing all the interviews that I've done, how many people have pulled themselves out of some really nasty stuff in life and have really stepped up, I guess, to help other people and realize what life is all about. And I don't think really, in all honesty, I've had one guest that said spirituality did not help them. I believe every single guest that I've had said, whatever your higher power belief is, right? It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's a higher power and it works for you. And you said, even, with the placebo stuff, right? And I've heard stories of that. I heard a story of a guy that had cancer, and they said, yeah, you probably have a 15% chance of making it, and then they called him up and said, hey, we've got this capsule that we think it's a new breakthrough. We think it might help you. And his cancer was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they told him it was just a test, within a couple of weeks, his cancer came back. Mm-hmm. So I'm a firm believer of it. Our thoughts are all part of energetic, universal atoms and all kinds of things that's going out there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and to be able for you to go through what you've gone through in your life, and just one day decide, I'm going to check into it and see how long. Couple questions: how long did it take you to start realizing there was some change happening in your life? And second, how much does faith have to fall into that category?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me answer the second part first. I think faith is a byproduct of applying the principles that of any sort of spirituality, right? And so I didn't have faith going into it. My goal was to hack into the nature of reality, so to speak, and figure out how so many cultures around the world could have independently come to similar conclusions about spirituality, right? I thought that was an interesting concept, because it's not just Western philosophy, it's Eastern religions and so on, and Egyptians going all the way back as far as written history is concerned. I forgot the first question because I have ADD. What was the first part of that question?
So the first question was, how long did it take you to start realizing that it was changing for you?
So, well, it was kind of an accident, really, how I stumbled across the experiential aspect of spirituality. I was running an intensive outpatient facility right after I got out of graduate school, and part of our process, for better or for worse, was mindfulness, right? A mindfulness aspect of which is an evidence-based modality, apparently, of treatment for, the insurance companies reimburse for it, right? So it must be right, it's like if you see it on. Nonetheless, so I pulled up some guided meditations on the internet, on YouTube, and I think again, one I mentioned earlier, it's a guy named Mooji, Mooji, who's sort of an Eastern philosophy guy, and he's got tons of these guided meditations on YouTube. And so I sat through one. It was about a 15-minute one. And, as the leader of the group, my job is kind of to sit there and lead by example. And so I sat and was listening to it. And, his guided meditation was interesting. It created the idea is again, to understand that his perspective, at least, is that we are not our thoughts, right? And that we are something else than our thoughts. And his wording was such that I was able to sort of detach and become the observer of my thoughts and little stories and habitual ideas that come into our mind if we're not really paying attention to it, which I think has some clinical benefit if we understand that a lot of our habitual thoughts, like cravings, for example, come into our head just randomly. And we understand, to gain the insight and understanding that we don't have to hitch our emotional wagon to those thoughts as they pass by. There's a lot of clinical value in that. And I did find a certain amount of peace, I guess you could say, in detachment from those habitual thoughts, because I'm in recovery too, right? So we're all on the same journey. And that was an experience for me that I could see why people would want to repeat that on a continuous basis. In fact, that detachment from our habitual thoughts and the emotions that invariably come with it in the absence of self-awareness is what we seek when we drink or do drugs, right? It's not, it takes away that emotion if we're able to do it, which doesn't take a lot of practice, frankly. It only took a few times through that experience. And I kind of looked forward to that aspect of the daily thing, because it gave me a reprieve from the daily thoughts that were going through my mind. And of course, me being a human being, there's no reason to think that technique and method would not be applicable to other people. I still wanted to know why it worked, though. So that was what the rest of the book was about. But that's what, so I started experiencing the benefits pretty much almost immediately.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's what my thing was with my 8-year weekend cocaine and alcohol, right? I mean, I was looking forward to Friday every single freaking week, because that was my opportunity to forget about work.
Yeah.
Because I did not know how to shut my brain off from it at all. And that was my way of shutting it off, which I hear a lot with a lot of people that come on the show, right? Again, it's those feelings or the thoughts or whatever may be happening with that certain individual. We don't want to think it anymore. We don't want to feel it anymore. And that's what drives us into going the wrong direction. And before we know it, it's got such a grasp on us. Then we don't know how to fricking get out of it, because it has such a hold.
Well, what one of the takeaways from doing a guided meditation from an Eastern philosophy type of guy is that presumably when you create a degree of separation between your thoughts and whatever the nature of that version, that thing is, that self, if you will, that is observing our thoughts, that opens the door to the idea of consciousness, right? The idea that, which again is nothing new, the ghost in the machine idea, right? That we're a bunch of neurons of this bag of chemicals that we walk around in. There was always a problem just from a physics perspective or biology, physics perspective, they all melt together at the subatomic level, of taking that leap, if you will, from this bag of chemicals, which is essentially a bunch of atoms, which are made up of subatomic particles, quarks, and electrons, basically. When you get down to that level, it's difficult to explain things like aspiration and relationships and love and connection, because subatomic particles presumably don't love other things, you know. And so the discrepancy between our day-to-day experience, my day-to-day experience, and that purely reductionistic perspective left a lot to be desired in terms of explaining how things work, right? And so this experience with the mindfulness guided meditations was useful in it forced me to want to explore that avenue. And in the past, you know, up until probably 2012, frankly, but you know, certainly in the old days, there was the philosophers who bought into this idea of consciousness just simply asserted it, you know, and the conclusion was also their argument, you know, basically the experience, right?
Yeah.
But as a, you know, armchair physicist, I couldn't really buy into that until something came along in 2012 that was the sort of the capstone was put on this concept of what's called quantum field theory. The idea about energy basically is the foundational aspect of the material universe, and that anything material is derived from how that energy process works, which is called quantum field theory and quantum mechanics. And so all of a sudden we got up to a point where we're working at the intersection of what we'd consider consciousness and material reality. And that is what, you know, this book puts together and explains how consciousness in fact does affect our you know, reality. I mean, if you think about it, frankly, anything any experience that we have, and any, you know, whether it's a house that we live in or a job that we have or our circumstances, ultimately started out as a thought, right, at some point. And you know, thoughts are not quarks and electrons. I mean, they are a result of how our neurons are connected in our brains, but our neuron connections are driven. Our neurons are made up of atoms, right? Molecules, which are made up of atoms, which are made up of subatomic particles. But if you look at the architecture of any given atom, let's say a hydrogen atom, right? The most common atom in the universe. It's got one electron and it's got one proton and one neutron, which are made up of a couple of quarks. But if you blew up the nucleus of the atom, the proton and neutron that are held together, to the size of a golf ball, the empty space, the area in which that electron flying around could exist, would be 3 miles across. Okay, so all that empty space, you know, I could go into a whole thing, but it's in the book. But all that empty space, obviously, there is something there, and I go about explaining, you know, providing the scientific data about what that empty space is. It's not really empty. It consists of the fields from which those electrons are actually derived. And that is the realm where consciousness works. And so if I were to share my screen with you for a minute, I
Yeah,
don't know,
please do. Absolutely.
can let me do that. There's this interesting section of let's see if I can find it here. There's an interesting section of a lecture that I show my patients, and at lectures, when I go around the country to do these lectures on this field theory clinical model. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Uh-oh.
So it should shoot me a notice, right, to allow me to do it, to open it up.
Let's try that again.
Because I've had other people share their screen.
Okay. Well, you know what? Actually, I probably don't have to share it, but I can explain it.
Okay.
Okay, but we possibly have all seen these little short clips of like neurons in real time reaching out and connecting with each other, right? When someone and that is what happens when a new thought takes place. We're constantly rewiring our brain, our neural network, if you will, when we learn new information. And as we retain new information, those neural networks get stronger, right? So that's common knowledge. What's interesting is that the brain can't recognize the difference between a real experience and one that is well imagined, right? And so if you can imagine, for instance, let's say that there's discrepancy between the kind of person that we were in addiction, let's say, or that we are if we're in active addiction, and an idealized version of ourselves. The brains of those two individuals are going to look different. The neural mapping is going to be different. And so what's interesting is when we meditate in a meditative state, we develop one of the methods that I use is called the magic wand thought experiment, where we actually, with the patients and we developed this very detailed vision, if you will, of what their idealized version of their self would be, not only themselves, but the reality in which they would walk. What would they look like? Who would be in their lives? Who would not be in their lives? What would they do? What would their average day, week, or month look like? Where would they go, etc.? The idea being that whatever vision they're describing has the overwhelming emotion of gratitude, profound gratitude. I can't believe how great my life is, right? From the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep. This process also reveals a lot of pathology, right? Unquestioned beliefs they have about what's possible for themselves, which makes great conversation. Anyway, once we develop that vision and develop the capacity to experience the emotion that would come, as they visualize being in that state, occupying that reality, if you will. What's interesting is we go through a guided meditation process, whether it's it's called a quantum guided meditation, where I customize the meditations for the individual and their specific vision. We basically, I use Muji type techniques to develop that separation from their current state so they can become the observer of their current self. And then we sort of occupy that envisioned version of themselves and go through that process and spend a half hour, 40 minutes in that state. And what's interesting is when we finish the guided meditation, their perceptions change to more closely resemble that idealized version of themselves, because all of the rewiring that's going on as their consciousness is engaged in the process of occupying their body, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah.
And so, when I was doing this and testing this model out on myself, I mean, it was a little bit. It was remarkable the efficiency with which it works. It's a shortcut. It's a hack. You're not waiting for your environment to sort of turn you into this version of yourself. What happens is that the improved version of ourself, if you will, our reality starts reflecting that instead of the other way around, which is certainly counterintuitive, and which is one of the reasons why I think this clinical model in Joe Dispenza's is still considered kind of cutting edge. It's not mainstream yet, but I'm just spreading the word and doing as much as I can to, because it's so effective. There's no reason why it shouldn't become more mainstream down the road.
Right.
I'm in the process of reaching out to having a research study done at the university to compare it to other clinical models. You have to manualize it, make sure it can be administered evenly among all the participants, and then compare it to other clinical models and see how the results are. What's interesting is that it is so effective and so effective so quickly is that one of the challenges is that, you know, our residual self-image has trouble catching up to our new reality. And so we don't feel like we deserve whatever is going on. And so there's this conflict, if you will, between our old residual self-image and the new one that we've sort of installed in just out of the blue. That can also have an impact on relational dynamics. If somebody's in a primary relationship and the shift in their personality is such that it can be a little disconcerting. So I usually end up working with both parties to help navigate the fundamental shift in personality to help the relationship so that it doesn't go off the rails.
You know, and I think that's really important. I'm glad that you brought that up, Andrew, because really it is. I am now, not saying I'm right, but I am now a firm believer that when a family member goes into recovery, that it's an absolute must that the family, at least those that are closest to that individual, right? Whether it be a mom or a dad or a husband or a wife or however it may be, that they go through some type of recovery as well. You know, it's like I heard Dave DeRocha from the Other Side Academy say a lot of times, if you take an addict and put them in the same environment that you pulled them out at, their actions and behaviors are going to come back, right? And it's because the other individuals don't know how to handle it. They're still handling it in the wrong way. And I think also with what you said on that, I've got a page here. It's like page 5, even just in the introduction of your book, where it says abstinence is not the end game. And it says many people incorrectly believe that the opposite of addiction is abstinence. And while it is true that abstinence for substance, I will use substance interchangeably for both substance and behavioral addictions, does in itself fix many life problems. And that's what you were just talking about, right? So it does help in all aspects of your life. And that's also another reason why I wanted to have you on the show, because our shows just isn't really all about people in their journey of recovery, right? Or people who are on the other side of the addiction. It's also educating people on what we can do just to even help ourselves, because having people on the show like you, Andrew, and so many other guests that I've had, my gosh, every single person that I've had on the show has helped me in my life one way or another. There's something that they said that just resonated with me and made me realize this is where I need to direct my life, right? Maybe it won't be for someone else, but at least it is for me. So if they touched my life in one way, someone else out there that's listening to the show, it's going to touch their life in one way or another. So question for you. I read the book Conscious Creator. I've read the book twice, and I'll be damned if I can remember who the author is of it, but if you look it up, Conscious Creator. How we're talking about how the neurons and everything work, right?
Right.
Like my friend Nick says, you can unplug a neuron and you can plug it back in to something that's more positive, right? You don't have to stay plugged into that one. You can unplug it and plug it into something better. It takes time, right? So it's just like when I decided to get back into going to the gym and getting physical fit again, because I was up at 198 pounds. I was drinking every weekend, snorting cocaine every weekend, right? I let my body go, wanted to get back into it. It takes that time to get to where you want to go. It just doesn't happen overnight. It took me some time to start learning and understanding what my brain was telling me. And I really started paying attention to it. Like I'd be driving down the freeway and all of a sudden I'm going, why am I thinking so many negative thoughts right now? I'm just driving down the road. But why is all this stuff coming and hitting me, right?
Yeah.
So it took some time as I'm like, okay, I'm not going to think this anymore. I'm going to think of something better. And then that subconscious is like, oh, no, you're not. Here it is again. And I'm like, yes, I am. So I was having that battle. However, each time I was doing it, that period between where the subconscious was coming back got longer and longer and longer. And so again, if someone wants to practice what you're talking about, it's not an overnight fix, right? Because you've got so many bad plugs in here that your neurons or outlets, right? That your neurons have been plugged into, negative ones. it takes some time,
Yeah.
correct? To unplug each one.
Well, I think you're right about that. The way that I think about it, though, is there are two different analogies I think that could be meaningful to different people. And what this model does is it actually compresses the time between the time that we're in state A, to our former state, and state B, something more closely resembling our ideal state, right? I kind of think of it like driving, for example. The normal way of driving, becoming a driver, right? When you're 16 years old, right? You got your permit. You go from a state where you get in the car, you're looking around, you push the clutch down, you got to make sure it's in neutral, you got to look over your shoulder, you start it up, make sure turn the windshield wipers up, right? Make sure the radio's down so you can see better.
Yeah.
And you back out of your spot and you're thinking about all this stuff consciously, right? Now we hop in the car, got our sandwich, we got our beverage, chicks are
On the phone.
makeup on and stuff, we're talking on the phone and driving down the freeway at 80 miles an hour, not even thinking about it. So we went through the process of, being a non-driver to becoming a driver through the process. So it's thinking about doing it, right? When you watched your parents drive, you were thinking about what it's like to be a driver. And then you start doing it and going through a process where you get better at it. And at some point, you could probably be considered a driver, right? So you go from thinking to doing to being. And, when it comes to making a fundamental shift in our life, let's say from being a drinker to a former drinker, right? Being a former drinker. This process, when we occupy that reality, if you will, that version of ourselves in our imagination for an extended period of time, we're really we're almost taking out the doing part, right? We go from thinking to being. And that's where that's where this type of clinical model is beneficial. We literally change our identity, our unquestioned beliefs about who we are by occupying a version of ourselves that we've created in our mind. And all the attitudes and implications that come with that. For instance, and a lot of people have trouble imagining what it would like to not have shame, for instance, infecting their perceptions, right? And so if we can remove the shame from our perceptions as we develop this idealized vision for who we would like to be, and have confidence and beliefs, formerly unquestioned beliefs about ourselves that are disparaging, and replacing those with positive ones that this idealized version of ourselves would have, and spending time in that state, we are necessarily going to rewire our neurons to reflect that version of ourselves. We don't have to take 5 years of having the world show us experiences that would reflect that version of ourselves. We're doing it in our minds. And it literally does change our perceptions. We do become something much more closely resembling that version of ourselves. So the idea of time is one of the benefits of engaging in a process like this, as opposed to just an old organic Newtonian linear version where you go from, like I described with the driver. Another way of thinking about it would be, if you're a musician, I don't know if there are any musicians, and there are plenty of addict musicians, certainly. Many of my heroes have died for various reasons from addiction. But I can go to a gig, for example, as a bass player, and maybe I'm sitting in for somebody, right? And so I'm not their original bass player. I didn't write the songs, but I can imagine playing them in my mind on my way to the gig, running through them as though I'm practicing them. And then when I get to the gig, I can pretty much emulate whatever their original bass player would play, resulting in a good performance with the band. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't matter, what bag of chemicals is playing the bass, as long as the music's being played. So, there is some there, right? When it comes to rewiring our brain to, it's called neuroplasticity is the fancy word for it. And my clinical model takes advantage of that, as does Joe Dispenza's. Mine is just specifically applied to addiction, which is nobody else has done.
I think you're onto something really. And I'm not just saying that because you're a guest on my show. I really do think that you are onto something because again, it's just helping unwire the bad stuff that we've been dealing with, for years in our life. And not even realizing it, right? So I was told 14, 15 years ago by someone who was a friend that said that they never trusted me because I was a liar and a manipulator. And I called BS on it, right? No, I'm not. And I started thinking about it a lot more and I realized that I was. And I started mastering my skills as I was growing up, not even realizing I was doing that. It's because I got in trouble for everything. And I learned how to lie and how to manipulate my way around it so I wasn't getting my butt kicked. And I continue to use those practices throughout my life and even into my adulthood. As long as I was getting away with what he wanted to get away with, or get what I wanted, basically, I was doing my job correctly.
Yeah, what you were doing was working, so why change
It was working, yeah, yeah, and
And
it
part of
took
your personality, right? It
it
just
was,
became so habitual that, like you said, you didn't even notice it until someone brought it up. And
yeah,
I think that's one of the challenges with people that are in early recovery, right? Is that we have these unquestioned, unexamined beliefs about ourselves and about what's possible and what's necessary to be lovable, right? Um, the opposite of addiction, right? Like you were saying, isn't abstinence. It's the ability to engage in healthy relationships. Well, why is that? Well, because it's only in the context of healthy relationships that true love exists.
yeah,
And in order to have healthy relationships, we need things that are exactly the opposite of what addiction does to us, right? We need to be trustworthy. We need to be honest. We need to be transparent. We need to not be a chameleon camouflage that we've developed the capacity to morph into whatever we believe will give us the best chances of being acceptable to others, right? That's why we would lie and cheat and do all those other things that are symptomatic behaviors of addiction, because of the shame that if people really knew everything about us, they sure as hell wouldn't love us, right? And we had that belief as usually starting out as infants, right? Growing up often in a dysfunctional family, either parents that had their own substance issues or that didn't have substance issues, but just were really, judgmental, performance driven. You'd only be validated if you, did things. You couldn't just be a human being; you had to be a human doing in order
yeah,
to be lovable, right? Perfectionism, all these different pathologies come from family of origin, and so addiction just makes them worse and moves us further away from being a safe person to love, which is the end game, the opposite of addiction. Because when we're a safe person to love, we have accurate access to our emotions. We can navigate relationships a lot better as a result. And when we get that human connection as a result of authenticity, which is what love is, strangely enough, that displaces any place that addiction really would get a chance to get a hold of. When I've said before, it's not my head knowledge that keeps me sober. Went to the best graduate school for addiction in the world, the Hazel and Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies, right? Took their advanced practice program, practiced on campus, wrote a book on, right, everything I know about addiction. But in the end, it's the day-to-day connection I get with my patients, my clients, that therapeutic connection, right? Honest authenticity, love, if you will, that keeps me sober.
yeah,
It makes me happy, and it gives me a sense of purpose, and it's addictive in itself, right? And I think that's part of another indication of sort of the nature of the universe, because all of those intentions that we have, especially that propensity for love, it doesn't come from us. I think it comes through us somehow. So in addition to our consciousness being essentially a form of energy, a defined form or of energy on a bigger level, I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that there is a higher power, a divine algorithm or something, that the information that defines the fields and their nature of which we are all derivative and everything in the universe is, it seems that the nature of the programming of those fields, the energy and the information that's in there, tends to naturally lead us toward a loving state, a state of connection. So, and it's not, I think that it's just another fact, if you will, that seems to reinforce the idea that maybe there's some sort of author of the information that underlies all of this stuff.
Yeah,
and that's my argument. And unfortunately, since we're derivative of these, the fields that are continuous and run throughout the universe, since we're we're products of them, we can't really claim any sort of objectivity because we are derived from the very same things we're trying to observe. But that's also one of the reasons why we're able to affect reality, because we are part and parcel of the reality that we're from which we're derived. So we literally become co-gods and creating our reality as we go along. That's the nature of the so-called double slit experiment, where it's only our knowledge of the system that determines its state of being. We're intrinsic as observers of our environment. We're intrinsically connected to creating our own local individual reality. And again, there's a clinical benefit to that, right? If we understand that, we understand that our thoughts are creating our reality as we go along. And so we need to start thinking about what we're thinking about. When we do that, we can have a much more positive impact, and our reality tends to shift and reflect something a little less chaotic, because we're no longer being victimized by our own lack of self-awareness and how that impacts our thoughts.
that is so flippin' true, because that's what has been happening in my life since I started using different practices and principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, seriously, it has. And also the right people start showing up in my life.
Yeah, interesting.
I mean,
it works.
It happens just like that. One day you get a phone call, or just like how I met you, right? Your assistant just reached out to me and said, hey, and I mean, within a few minutes of sitting down with you at the coffee shop at High Point, by the way, I want to give them a plug because they're one of our sponsors. Love those guys at High Point Coffee in West Jordan. Again, to me, that's how I looked at it. To me, I looked at it as the universe brought us together. Even though it was your assistant that reached out, there was everything's entwined. There's a reason why it's happening.
It serves a purpose. And again, there's a clinical benefit when you start understanding and having experiences that reaffirm that belief, right? The only thing that's changed for you since you got sober was your thought process. But guess what? Your reality followed suit. And it's getting to the point where it's almost like you can tell your thoughts and your attitudes are aligned with something more, I guess, aligned with the universe's plan for you, which I think if the universe did have an intention based upon my experiences of applying this stuff, it's that the universe would like us to fulfill our true potential, whatever that looks like. And that's part of what that vision is about, right? The magic wand thought experiment, to define what our fully realized potential version of ourself would be, because in that state, we will be the happiest that we can possibly be, with the greatest depth that we can imagine, with the greatest frequency possible, is when we're fully, truly realized our full potential in this plane of existence. I think that's our happiest state. And what happens when we develop that vision and we plant that beacon on the horizon, at least we know what direction to head to, and it's not always going to be a straight line, right? We're going to end up all over the place, but we're heading generally in that direction. The universe sort of, when we have that vision, brings people into our lives. The universe validates that step of faith on our part and our certainty about our vision, and conspires in our favor to move us in that direction by, like you said, people show up out of nowhere that you could never have imagined that you'd want to talk to. When I started writing this book and started working on some of those things, I was within a matter of months, I think I read about it, or weeks actually, I was my life intersected with a couple of theoretical physicists. One formerly worked for the military, and as I was developing this idea, it's like I wanted to bounce it off somebody, and these guys just showed up. One was the guest of a person that I was working with, and one was a friend of a friend that I was meeting with for breakfast. And both of them sort of reaffirmed, yeah, there could be some there. And so I kept going. It's like when you have that clarity of vision, then it's like hitting all the green lights, on your way someplace. And then when you have enough experiences like that reinforce your, or when I had enough experiences that reinforced, it just kept reinforcing my sense of spirituality that, well, maybe there is something here. So through the process of writing the book, I was literally undergoing the experiences that led me to publish the book. And so I started out from a very skeptical perspective and ended up with at least the framework of a working spirituality that works. It's just very practical. And like you said, not worrying about the clinical benefits of it, right? Now, when I meet somebody or have what I might view as an adverse experience, I don't look at it as an adverse experience because based on my experiences, pretty much every adverse experience I've ever had has created opportunities for me to shed other aspects of my life that weren't really helpful, or just sort of gave me an opportunity to develop new relationships with other people that turned out to be more helpful than had I not had that adverse situation. And when I know that stuff in advance, guess what? My stress level goes down. I'm less likely to want to self-medicate. And again, another spiritual benefit of spirituality that's clinical and practical. So, yeah, it's I'm very happy with the outcome of the book. I've been applying the stuff. I'm happy to consult with anybody that wants to work with me and develop these things. I've actually developed a workbook that I'm almost finished with, that it can be used so that any clinician can administer this model with somebody in a group setting or an individual setting. It provides a template, linear template to navigate. So people can use the book more almost like a textbook, right? And then the questions that are in the workbook correspond on a chapter by chapter basis, so they can apply it to themselves. They can apply it as a clinician with patients. It's got a lot of applications.
Yeah, you put a lot of thought in this book, and thank you for my copy, by the way. I just want our listeners to know that Andrew gave me a copy, and I was talking to him before the show that I was doing my best to read as much of it before I actually had him on. And I got to the introduction, and a lot of times I skip the introduction in a book and go right to the first chapter and start reading it. And something told me to go back and started looking at it. And guys, seriously, I've got every flipping page dog-eared, highlighted. I mean, almost every single one. And this is just the introduction. This book's probably going to be this thick by the time I get done because of all the dog ears, so
yeah, it's a very densely written book, right? If you look at some of the it's available on Amazon, but if you look at some of the reviews, it's very interesting because there's like 18 there that I looked at, and it's like they all take something away different from the book. And I think that's a sign of a well-written book, right? It's got a lot of depth, and so and even the same person can read it twice and internalize what they can, and then they go back and read it again, and parts that maybe they didn't quite grasp onto start sticking out more to them. What's cool is that there's like 36 hours of accompanying video content. When you go through the book, there's a media vault on my website that's referred to right by the table of contents. And it's got, TED Talks. It's got like those Muji type of guided meditations, and it goes chapter by chapter as you go through the book. You'll be reading, and then you'll see an icon says 3.4, right? So you go to the web page, scroll down to chapter 3, video 4, click on the link, watch the video, and then you go back to reading, and the book really connects all the videos together, which is a much better experience. Otherwise, it would be an awfully thick book, right?
Yes.
I kept it down to like 260 pages. The first part of the book, it's broken up into two parts. The first part is basically the etiology of addiction and the underlying aspects. And then the second part of the book starts getting more into the theory, the quantum field theory, and how that works, and all the videos that accompany that. A lot of the videos, from Nova or Cosmos and things like that, to really bring the content to life with visualizations, animations, and things like that. So it would be impossible to read this book from front to back and watch the videos without being fundamentally changed, and without having an incredibly strong foundation for spirituality, which of course, again, the benefits of we've discussed already: decreased stress, hope, a sense of control over our destiny and over our day-to-day lives, removing fear from our lives, replacing that with faith that maybe there's a universe that wants us to be happy.
Yeah.
And those types of things for people in recovery and addiction are invaluable.
Amen to that. And again, we talked about it early in the show. I really see this book, even though it shows in recovery on the front cover. Just from what I've read thus far, I really do believe that, Andrew, that this book is for everyone.
Oh yeah, anybody would
it is. Yeah. Anyone
the principles apply to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, by the end of the book, really, addiction really becomes a secondary, issue. I mean, because when you get obsessed with, immersing oneself in the principles defined here, there's really no room for addiction. I mean, we become so hopeful and curious on a day-to-day basis about what the universe is going to bring into our lives, that just that excitement alone, keeps away cravings. It's not, it's applied to anybody.
Yeah. So, everything that you've said today in the show, I'm so glad that you're here, because it really helps me, because these are things I've been working on for the past 14 years, and I will continue to work on them, and just to see how much it's changed my life, and gosh, in so many different ways, right? In a ton of ways. And it's crazy, because now when things start going south, instead of sitting and dwelling on it, which sometimes I still catch myself doing, right? We're allowed to feel our feelings. It's just, the trick is not to get stuck there, allow them to happen, and move on. Mm-hmm. Is when something's going a different direction, I really start putting more thought, going, okay, why is this happening to me? What is it that I'm thinking that's causing this to come into my life? And I've had some people say, you're freaking nuts for thinking that way. And it's okay. That's their belief, right? However, I know, and it's even scientifically proved in a lot of different ways, that our thoughts do create stuff, right? And you talked about it with the placebo effect right at the beginning of the show. Right. It is so flippin' true. And I'm here to say, guys, it really, really works. When things start happening, it's like I had an issue here, it's about 6 months ago, where everything on my left side was hurting. My shoulder was hurting, which I got 2 torn muscles in my shoulder anyway. My foot was hurting. Something was going on with my knee. And I'm thinking, what the heck am I thinking in my life that's creating all this stuff to happen on my left-hand side? What's behind it? What's the meaning behind it? And I really started concentrating more on my thoughts, and also going, okay, whatever it is that I'm thinking that's negative or whatever's happening, I got to start shifting things. And these symptoms are going away. They're starting to go away. And I'm not one that takes ibuprofen. I take an aspirin here and there just for blood, to keep my blood thinned up a little bit.
Sure.
And luckily, thank goodness, to this point, being 60, I'm not on any medications, nothing at all. And it's cool to go, I just got to start thinking in a different way, and I can create whatever it is that I want to create, or yeah, draw in. And again, spirituality, it's all part of it. That's how I see it, right? It's just not changing the thought. It's the spirituality. And once I let go of the steering wheel and allowed my higher power, for it's God for me, to take over my life, my steering wheel goes a heck of a lot straighter. And it's so nice to know that I have that in my life to help me go in the direction I want to go.
Well, I think along those lines, what's interesting is that a lot of people have a problem with two things. But first, a lot of people have the problem with this idea of, turning their will and their lives over to the care of God as we understand them. With this clinical model and the understandings that come with it, it's not a big stretch, because where do you think our aspirations come from, right? They start out as energy, organized as information, which then materializes into our thoughts. And our aspirations come through us, right? So our positive aspirations, the ones that aren't infected by addictive thinking, are God's will for us, if you want to call it that, right? So, that there's no discrepancy between. A lot of people seem to get the idea that they have to give up their lives or something in favor of God's will for them. No, it's your will, your idealized will for yourself, as it comes from your true self, not the false self that you've developed over the course of years of addiction, is God's will for you, I guess, would be the one way to put that. Second thing is, you alluded to the idea that some people might be critical or skeptical, right, of this approach. I think that a lot of the people that we would tend to talk to about this on the front end, without any experience in it, there's probably, when we tell people that their thoughts and their ideas and their attitudes actually have a material impact on their reality, one of the reasons why they might reject that has less to do with they might want to discount it because, frankly, they don't want to take responsibility for their future. It's a lot easier to be a victim and say, oh no, my reality is just dictated to me by apparently what everybody else's agenda has for me.
Yeah.
And that way they don't have to take responsibility for it. And based on my experience as an addict and working with them for nearly a decade now in a professional capacity, I don't think that's an unreasonable explanation for their incredulity toward the idea that their thoughts have anything to do with their future. Because if they don't take responsibility for what they're thinking about, then they can just play victim. And
yeah.
If that's how they want their life to be, I guess that's their choice. But when you know that that your thoughts do have something to do with your reality, then that can be exciting too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I suppose I should throw in, I'm doing a workshop up at Snowbird on October 13 through 15. It's like a compressed version of this material, the core aspects. Normally, if I went through the book and watched all the videos, it'd probably be 40 hours worth of content. And I would be spread over a period of time, like a month. But I'm doing a workshop up at Snowbird on October 13 through 15. That's Friday through Sunday. It's basically 30 hours of intensive work, and it's going to be a small group, probably 10 to 15 people. And it's a beautiful setting, and anybody that's interested in participating in that, they can go to my website, www.andrewgpierce.com. That's andrewgpierce.com. And I'll hook you up.
Okay. And does it show that on there, Andrew?
There is a page
on the workshop.
Yeah, there is a page on the website for the workshop. What's interesting is my intent is to have clinicians and patients there, so that like clinical directors, they can see if they want to integrate this type of program in their treatment center. And by having patients there, they can also interface with the patients and compare notes on their experiences. So everybody wins.
I love it. Yeah, I'm looking at your website right now, and it's right at the top. So it's right above your name where it says about Andrew. It shows home, stage 2 recovery workshop, October 2023. So that's where you find it. And I'll make sure that that's in the notes as well. So two last things here so you can get back to your day. I don't want to keep you very long, Andrew. What do you want our listeners to gain from listening to this show today?
Oh boy, I would say a couple of things. Number one is, our thoughts do have a lot to do with our reality. In fact, that's our reality's genesis. Our reality flows from us. It's not the other way around. Number two, that engaging in a program such as this isn't contradictory to 12-step type recovery. If anything, it enhances it. Those are the two takeaways mainly.
Okay.
And that don't be afraid of taking responsibility for your future, because if you don't, you're just running someone else. You're playing someone else's program.
Yeah, good point. Would that be your main message as well?
Yep.
Okay, I love it. Well, Andrew, again, buddy, gosh, man, thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing all this amazing information that you shared today. I know we probably could have gone at least 2-3 hours on this show because there's so much knowledge that you have. You've put so much work and thought into it. So, I mean, you just didn't grab stuff out of your rear and start throwing up. And I mean, you've put a lot of thought and effort into this. And I understand the reason why you did it is, one, to help yourself, but also to help so many other individuals out there that are struggling with things. And this is just another tool in our tool belt, right?
Yep.
To help people. And there's some recovery programs that don't work. They're not all for everyone. This may be just the one that may be the ticket that someone's looking for that's really going to help them. And I really do hope you have a chance to talk with my good friend Janie Marvin.
Yes, I will make an effort to do that.
Yeah, I think you start talking about the physics and all this stuff, you guys will probably end up spending a whole day in a coffee shop because she is amazing. I think she'll blow your mind as well.
Well, since I guess that would be a good final point is, I never met anyone too stupid to get sober, but I've met a lot of people too smart to get sober. I was one of them. I had 13 years and then I had an 18-year run after that. But the more analytical people are, the less open they are to the idea of spirituality. So, this type of program, this type of model is ideal for people that overthink things.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of us have a problem to do every once in a while. I have that issue on the golf course. I start overthinking things too much and then I play like crap. If I just go to have fun and just do whatever, then I usually end up playing a pretty good game.
And don't forget your foot wedge then.
Yeah, right. Got that. Well, again, Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today. I really do appreciate it. And I want to say thank you to all our guests, all our past guests that have come on, past guests, even co-hosts, and all our amazing sponsors, guys. Thank you so much. It's all of you that make this show possible. And I'm still in shock that we are past 200 episodes. I never, ever saw this seriously, even when we hit 100, I'm like, oh my gosh, 200 seems so far away. And it was here like in a blink. So again, thank you everyone for all your love and all your support. And remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.